He should have been furious. The dark stain of coffee bloomed across the pristine white of his shirt, a warm, spreading impurity against the stark black of his suit. Any other man, any other day, would have met this clumsy collision with a snarl of ice. But the man who stood perfectly still on the evening pavement, Dante Moretti, felt nothing of the sort. The only thing burning through him was a cold, possessive curiosity that had nothing to do with the spilled drink and everything to do with the woman who had stumbled into his chest. She was soft everywhere, a gentle abundance of curves wrapped in a simple beige dress that did nothing to hide the lush reality of her body. Her face, tilted up in apology, was framed by a cascade of dark hair, her features full and lovely. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were a beautiful, clouded blue, seeing nothing of the chaos she had caused, focused inward. She was blind. And in that single, shattering moment of impact, as his hand shot out to steady her, Dante felt a switch flip deep within his soul. An ancient, territorial instinct he hadn't known was sleeping. He had just found something that belonged to him. The woman, Isla, flinched back, her free hand clutching the handle of a slender white cane while the other still held the now-empty paper cup. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," she stammered, her voice a low, melodic thing that vibrated straight through his ribs. I couldn't tell anyone was there. Please, let me pay for the cleaning. I'm so sorry." Her apology was a frantic stream of sound, the scent of coffee and something uniquely her, like vanilla and warm skin, filling the space between them. His men, positioned discreetly nearby, began to close in, their faces grim, but Dante lifted a single, almost imperceptible finger. They froze. He ignored them. He ignored the stain on his $1,000 shirt. He only looked at her. He lowered his hands from her soft arms, the memory of the feel of her already burning into his palms. "It is of no consequence," he said, his voice a low rumble, the accent of his homeland coloring the edges of his words. "But you will allow me to see you home. The streets are not safe this time of evening." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of a new reality that had just been born in the space of a spilled coffee. She was his to protect now. Isla's head tilted, a delicate motion of confusion and apprehension. "Oh, no, that's not necessary. I'm perfectly fine, really. I live just a few blocks away. I walk it all the time." She tried to take a step back, to re-establish the space he had so effortlessly collapsed, but he did not move. He was a mountain in front of her, a wall of warmth and radiating power that her senses screamed at her to be wary of. She could feel the stillness of the air around him, the way the ambient city sounds seemed to quiet in his presence. This was not an ordinary man. "I insist," Dante said again, the words smooth as velvet but lined with steel. He took a half-step closer, and she could feel the heat rolling off his body. He gestured to his right-hand man, Marco, who had materialized at his side like a shadow. "My car's here." "It will be no trouble, Marco." A man who had seen Dante Moretti execute rivals with the same detached calm he used to order dinner, watched his boss with a carefully blank expression that hid his utter shock. The boss did not do this. He did not engage with civilians. He certainly did not concern himself with minor accidents. Yet here he was, his entire formidable attention focused on this soft, flustered woman as if she were the only person on the planet. Isla felt a prickle of real fear now. This was wrong. The tone of his voice, the possessive way he had steadied her, the sheer immovable presence of him. "Thank you, but I'm going to have to decline," she said, trying to inject a firmness into her voice that she did not feel. She gripped her cane tighter. "I have to get going," she made to step around him, but a large, warm hand gently closed around her arm. The touch was not rough, but it was completely unyielding. It was a manacle of polite force. "That will not be possible," Dante murmured, his voice pitched so low only she could hear it. "You and I have business. Now, get in the car." Tesoro, the endearment, so intimate and unearned, sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts terror and a strange, unwelcome thrill. She was being abducted, in the most courteous, quiet, and terrifying way possible. Marco opened the rear door of a gleaming black sedan that smelled of rich leather and quiet money. Dante's hand guided her, his touch proprietary, steering her away from her intended path and into his world. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her in with him, the sound as final as a vault closing. The interior of the car was silent and cool, a stark contrast to the bustling city street they had just left. It swallowed all outside noise, creating an unnervingly intimate cocoon. Isla sat rigidly, her hands clenched to her lap, her cane resting against her leg. The man beside her, Dante, had not spoken since they got in. She could feel his presence as a tangible weight, a pressure in the air. She could hear the soft, almost silent rhythm of his breathing, the faint rustle of his expensive suit as he shifted slightly. He smelled of cologne, something subtle and masculine, layered over the lingering scent of her spilled coffee. Finally, he spoke. "What is your name?" he asked. The question was simple, but his tone made it feel like an interrogation, as if the answer was something he was taking, not something she was giving. "Isla," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Isla," he repeated, tasting the name. "It is a beautiful name. It suits you." He was studying her. She could feel his gaze on her face, her hair, her body. It was an unnerving sensation, to be scrutinized so intensely by someone she could not see. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She hated it. And yet, a part of her, a part that had felt invisible for so long, felt a strange flutter. He wasn't looking at her with pity, the way most people did when they realized she was blind. This felt different. It felt hungry. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, forcing strength back into her voice. "I told you, I live just a few blocks from the cafe. We are not going to your home," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I am taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere I can have my tailor see to your dress and a doctor ensure you are not injured in the fall." "I didn't fall," she protested. "And my dress is fine. You're the one covered in coffee." You're kidnapping me," she said the word out loud, and it hung in the silent car, absurd and terrifyingly real. He was silent for a long moment. Then, a low chuckle rumbled in his chest. It was not a sound of amusement. It was a sound of ownership. "You have a spirited heart, Isla," he said softly. "No, I am not kidnapping you. I am correcting a mistake. You entered my path. That makes you my responsibility. That is how my world works." The car turned smoothly, and she knew they were no longer heading in the direction of her small apartment. They were heading somewhere else, somewhere unknown. She was being pulled into his world, a world she couldn't see, but could feel tightening around her like a finely woven net. The car descended into what felt like an underground garage, the air growing cooler. When it stopped, her door was opened by Marco, but it was Dante's hand that found hers, guiding her out. His grip was firm, his palm warm and dry against her own. He led her to an elevator, the scent of him, the sound of his measured footsteps on the concrete, the only guideposts in her darkness. The elevator ride was silent and swift, ascending for what felt like an eternity before it opened directly into a living space. The air changed immediately. It was warmer, scented with something like sandalwood and old books. The floor beneath her feet was no longer cold concrete, but a thick, plush rug. "Welcome to my home," Dante said from beside her. His voice echoed slightly in the large space. She could hear the faint hum of electronics, the distant sigh of a ventilation system. It was a place of immense quiet and control. "Please sit." He guided her to a sofa that felt like it was made of butter-soft leather. "I will have someone bring you a change of clothes. And something to drink." He was treating this like a social visit, a polite invitation, but the steel beneath his words was ever present. She was a guest who was not allowed to leave. A woman named Sophia, with a gentle voice and soft hands, appeared a few minutes later. She helped Isla to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, the bathroom tiled in what felt like cool, smooth marble. Sophia laid out a silk robe for her. "Mr. Moretti asked me to draw you a bath," she said quietly. "He also said your dress will be cleaned and returned, but he has selected something else for you to wear for now." Isla wanted to refuse, to scream, to fight, but a deep, pragmatic part of her knew it was pointless. This man, Dante, moved with the absolute certainty of a predator. To struggle was to invite a tighter grip. So she allowed Sophia to help her, sinking into the warm, fragrant water of the bath, feeling the tension begin to seep from her muscles, replaced by a creeping dread. Meanwhile, Dante stood in his office, looking out over the glittering city lights. Marco entered without knocking. "Boss, we have a problem," he said, his voice tight. "Rico Vella is making his move. He's claiming our port shipments are short. He says he has proof." A recording. Dante turned from the window, his face a mask of cold fury. "Proof? What proof?" "It's a conversation, supposedly between one of our guys and his. But the file is corrupted. Our tech guys say it's useless, just static and noise. But Vella is using it to sow doubt with the commission." Dante's jaw tightened. "A traitor. In his own organization. Find out who." "Find out now," Marco nodded. "We're working on it. But, boss, the girl?" He gestured vaguely in the direction of the guest suite. "What is this?" Dante's gaze went distant for a moment. "She is a complication I did not expect," he said, his voice low. "And she is not leaving. For her own safety. Understood?"
Marco understood perfectly.
The woman wasn't a complication. She was a new acquisition. And in their world, anything Dante Moretti acquired, he protected with lethal finality. Isla emerged from the suite wearing a simple but exquisitely made cashmere dress in a deep emerald green that had been left for her. It clung to her curves in a way that felt both luxurious and exposing. Her bare feet sank into the plush carpet as she used her cane to navigate her way back to the main living area, following the sound of low, tense voices. She found Dante and Marco in what felt like a large study or office. A fire crackled in a hearth nearby, and the scent of whiskey hung in the air. They fell silent as she entered. "I hope the accommodations are to your liking," Dante said, his voice smoother than it had been in the car. But she could hear the tension humming beneath it. "They're extravagant," Isla replied honestly. "I would like to go home now." "That is not an option," he stated flatly. "There are things in motion tonight. You are safer here with me." Before she could argue, a frustrated sound came from Marco. "It's useless, boss." "Listen," he pressed a button, and a burst of harsh static filled the room. It was a wall of electronic noise, crackling and distorted. Through it, she could just make out the faint, garbled cadence of human speech, but it was impossible to discern any words. "That's the recording from Vella?" Dante asked, his voice laced with disgust. "That's it," Marco confirmed. "Our experts said it's a lost cause. The file was damaged during the transfer. They played it again. And this time Isla froze. She tilted her head, her entire body going still, her focus narrowing to a single point. Everyone else heard noise, a garbled mess. But she heard something else. Her world was one of sound. Without sight, her hearing had become preternaturally sharp, a finely tuned instrument she had honed over years, first out of necessity, and then through her profession. She was an audio forensic analyst. She cleaned up compromised recordings for court cases, isolating whispers from hurricanes, finding truth in the noise. And in that blast of static, she heard it. A pattern. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound buried deep beneath the distortion. And under that, a man's voice, whispering. "Play it again," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Both men turned to look at her. Marco looked confused, but Dante's eyes narrowed with sudden, intense interest. "Why?" he asked. "Because it's not just noise," she said, taking a hesitant step toward the sound source. "There's a voice in there. And something else. A vocal tick. A palatal click. It happens right before he says a word with an S sound. It's a very specific speech pattern. I can isolate it. I can clean this." There was a moment of stunned silence in the room. Marco looked from Isla to his boss, his expression one of disbelief.
"An audio expert?
This woman? It seemed impossible. But Dante did not look disbelieving. He looked at her as if she had just revealed the final, perfect piece of a puzzle he didn't even know he was solving. The universe had not just dropped a beautiful, soft woman into his path. It had delivered him a weapon. "You are certain?" Dante asked, his voice a low, dangerous thrum. He crossed the room to stand before her, so close she could feel the heat of his body, smell the whiskey on his breath. He reached out, his fingers gently touching her chin, tilting her face up towards his. "You can pull a voice from that wreckage?" "It's what I do for a living," Isla said, her heart hammering against her ribs. His touch was electric, a brand against her skin. "I work with law enforcement, private investigators. I analyze compromised audio files for evidence." His thumb stroked softly along her jawline. "Providence," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He turned to his lieutenant.
Marco.
"Get her whatever she needs. The best equipment we have." Now, the next hour was a blur. Marco, his initial skepticism replaced by a grudging respect, led her to a state-of-the-art sound studio hidden behind a paneled wall in the office. He set up a console under her direction, her fingers flying over the controls with a familiarity that belied her blindness. She slipped on a pair of high-fidelity headphones, shutting out the world, shutting out everything but the chaos of the recording. She went to work, her mind sinking into the rhythms of the sound waves, teasing apart the layers of static, filtering frequencies, amplifying the faintest of signals. Dante watched her unmoving from the doorway. He watched the absolute concentration on her face, the way her brow furrowed, the slight parting of her lips. He had been drawn to her softness, her vulnerability. But this was something else. This was power. A quiet, focused, brilliant power that no one else could see. And it was all his. The sudden shattering of glass from the main living area ripped him from his trance. Marco yelled, "Boss, we've got company." The sharp, distinct crack of gunfire echoed through the penthouse. Then attack. Vela wasn't just making threats. He was trying to decapitate the Moretti organization in one swift, violent move. Marco was already moving, pulling a weapon from beneath his jacket. Dante's own hand went to the small of his back, his eyes flashing towards Isla. She had pulled off the headphones, her face pale, her beautiful eyes wide with alarm but not panic. She was listening, tracking the sounds of the assault with the same intensity she'd given the recording. "Stay here," Dante commanded, his voice a lethal growl. "Do not move from this room." But as he turned to join the fight, a sudden thought, cold and clear, struck him. They weren't just here for him. They were here for the recording. The only piece of evidence that could expose their betrayal. The firefight was brutal and short. Dante and Marco moved with the deadly, synchronized grace of men who had fought side by side for years. The attackers, sent by Rico Vela, were professionals, but they had severely underestimated the fortress that was Dante Moretti's penthouse and the lethality of its owner. Glass crunched underfoot as Dante moved through the living room, a shadow dispatching shadows. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, his focus absolute, his goal singular: eliminate the threat. But even as he fought, a part of his mind remained tethered to the soundproofed studio, to the woman inside. The thought of any harm coming to her ignited a rage in him, so profound it was almost blinding. He finished his final opponent with a cold efficiency that left Marco staring for a half-second too long. "Secure the perimeter," Dante ordered, his chest heaving slightly, the adrenaline of battle singing in his veins. "No one else gets in. Or out." He turned and walked back towards the office, his weapon still in hand. He pushed open the door to the studio, expecting to find Isla huddled in a corner, terrified. He was wrong. She was right where he had left her, sitting at the console, the headphones back on her ears. Her hands were steady on the controls, her expression one of intense, unwavering focus. She had not screamed. She had not hidden. She had trusted him to handle the violence outside while she handled the war she was uniquely qualified to fight. She had protected the work. The sight of her, so calm and resolute amidst the chaos, struck him with the force of a physical blow.
It was more than obsession now.
It was reverence. He watched her for a long moment, the sounds of his men securing the rest of the penthouse fading into the background. She was in her own world, a world of sound and secrets, and he found he would burn the rest of the world to the ground to keep her safe within it. Finally, she stilled. She slowly pulled the headphones from her ears, the silence of the studio rushing in. She turned her head in his direction, though she could not see him standing there. "I have it," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I have the voice." He strode to her side, leaning down, his presence enveloping her. "You are unharmed?" he asked, his voice rough with the aftermath of violence. "I'm fine," she said, and for the first time, there was no trace of fear in her voice. Only a quiet, unshakable confidence. "I've isolated it. It's a whisper, but it's clear." He says, "Vela will have the port by morning." She paused, then pressed a button on the console. A single, disembodied voice emerged from the speakers, stripped of all static, a ghost in the machine. It was thin, reedy, and held a distinct characteristic. "And," Dante prompted, his eyes dark. "And," Isla continued, "I know who it is. You recognize the voice?" Marco asked, appearing in the doorway, his own weapon now holstered. "No," Isla said, shaking her head.
Better.
"The recording is low quality, but my software can create a vocal fingerprint. It analyzes pitch, cadence, and unique identifiers. The most prominent identifier here is the palatal click I mentioned. It's a tiny, almost subliminal sound the speaker makes before sibilant sounds. It's as unique as a fingerprint." She turned her face toward Dante. "One of your men, the one who first brought the recording into the room, he has the same tick. I heard it when he spoke to you earlier. He said, 'Our experts said it's a lost cause.'" Dante's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who she meant. Antonio, his cousin. A man who had been with him since they were boys in Sicily, who had eaten at his table, who he had trusted with his life. The betrayal was so deep, so unthinkable, it almost took his breath away. He looked at Isla, at her calm, certain face, and he felt a wave of savage gratitude so powerful it was dizzying. She had seen, had heard, the truth that all his power, all his wealth, all his men had missed. She had handed him the head of the snake on a silver platter. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. Her skin was soft, her hand small in his. "Marco," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, his eyes never leaving Isla's face. "Bring Antonio to me. Tell him I wish to thank him for his loyalty." Marco's face hardened with understanding. He simply nodded and disappeared. The next 20 minutes passed in a taut silence. Dante did not release Isla's hand. He led her from the studio back to the leather sofa, sitting beside her, his thumbs stroking lazy circles over her knuckles. He did not speak of the attack or the traitor. He simply held her hand, anchoring himself to her. Finally, Marco returned, his expression grim. Behind him, a man in his late 40s shuffled into the room, his face pale with a sick, dawning comprehension. It was Antonio. "Dante," Antonio began, his voice slick with false concern. "Marco said there was an attack. Are you all right?" "I came as soon as I heard. I am perfectly fine, Cugino," Dante said, his voice deceptively mild. He stood, pulling Isla gently to her feet beside him, his arms sliding possessively around her waist. He kept her tucked against his side. Thanks to the very astute ears of my guest, Antonio's eyes flickered to Isla, a dismissive, condescending sneer touching his lips for a fraction of a second. The blind girl. Vela had told him about her, the clumsy woman who'd spilled coffee on the boss. A nobody. A distraction. "I don't understand," he said, forcing a confused smile. Dante's own smile was a chilling, razor-thin line. "Our expert here," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "managed to salvage your little recording. A remarkable feat, wouldn't you say?" "She says it's a lost cause." He repeated the words Antonio had said earlier, and he saw the flicker of panic in his cousin's eyes. Dante squeezed Isla's waist gently. "Play it for him." Isla reached for the small remote Marco placed in her hand and pressed the button. The traitor's whisper filled the silent, wreckage-strewn room. "Vela will have the port by morning." Antonio's face drained of all color. It was his voice. Unmistakable. He stared at Isla, his sneer replaced by a look of pure, venomous hatred. This woman, this insignificant, blind woman had ruined everything. She's lying, he spat. She's a witch. She faked it. You would believe this creature, over your own blood. Dante took a slow step forward, shielding Isla with his body. She is more my blood now than you ever were, he said, his voice dropping to a dead, flat calm that was more terrifying than any shout. You underestimated her, Antonio. That was your first mistake. Your last one was betraying me. The aftermath was silent and swift. Dante dealt with his cousin with a chilling finality that left no room for doubt. The threat from Rico Vela, now deprived of his inside man and exposed to the Commission, would crumble within days. The war was over before it had truly begun, all because of a woman who navigated the world with sound. When Dante returned to the living room, the evidence of the fight had been cleared away, the broken glass swept up, the bodies removed. Only the faint scent of cordite and the jagged hole in the plate glass window remained. Isla was exactly where he had left her, standing by the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked small and fragile in the vast, opulent room, yet he knew she possessed a strength that could topple empires. He came to stand behind her, his large frame a shield against the world. He didn't speak, just rested his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs gently massaging the tense muscles there. She leaned back against his chest with a soft sigh, a gesture of trust that made his stone heart ache with a feeling he couldn't name. It was more than possession. It was devotion. It's over, he said softly, his lips near her hair. You are safe. I was never scared, she whispered, which he knew wasn't entirely true. But he also knew she meant she had not been scared for herself, because she had trusted him. The thought was humbling. He turned her around to face him, his hands sliding down her arms to capture her hands. He lifted them to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Everything I have is because of you tonight, he murmured against her skin. You saw what no one else could see. You heard the truth in the lies. His hands moved to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle, reverent. His thumbs traced the elegant line of her jaw, the soft curve of her cheek. When you stumbled into me today, Isla, I thought I was just a man who had his shirt ruined. I was wrong. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, the world narrowing to the space between them. I was a king who had just found his queen. Her breath hitched, a soft, sharp sound in the quiet room. No one had ever spoken to her like this, looked at her, truly seen her like this. They saw her blindness, her size. They saw a liability, a curiosity, a charity case. Dante Moretti saw a queen. I don't belong in this world, she whispered, the words a confession of her deepest fear. You belong wherever I am, he corrected her, his voice an unbreakable vow. You are mine, Isla. Your mind, your courage, your beautiful, brilliant heart. It all belongs to me now. And I will kill any man who ever makes you feel invisible again. He lowered his head and finally, captured her lips with his. The kiss was not rough or demanding. It was a seal, a brand, a promise of savage protection and absolute worship, a claim made on her very soul. In the heart of his dangerous world, the blind woman was the only one with true sight, and he would never let her go. Days later, the penthouse was no longer a gilded cage, but a sanctuary. Isla moved through it with a newfound confidence, the map of its sounds and textures now familiar to her. The simple beige dress was a distant memory, replaced by a wardrobe of silks and cashmeres and rich, deep colors that Dante had chosen for her himself. He loved to watch her, to see how the luxurious fabrics draped over her generous curves he now considered the most perfect art form in existence. She was not his prisoner. She was the center of his universe. He would sit for hours in his office, ostensibly working, but his attention would be on her as she sat curled on the sofa, a specialized tablet in her lap, listening to audiobooks or doing her own consulting work, which he now funded with an obscene budget. Her old life, her small apartment, her struggle to be seen and valued by a world that prized only the conventional, was gone, wiped away. In its place was this:
Power. Safety.
Adoration. One evening, Marco found Dante standing by the repaired floor-to-ceiling window, watching Isla as she directed a cleaner on the proper way to care for the sensitive audio equipment in the studio. She was patient but firm, her instructions precise. She was in command of her space. Rico Vela sent a message, Marco said quietly. He offers his apologies. And a tribute. He knows he's finished. Dante didn't even turn. Reject it. Send back the head of his most trusted captain. Let him know that apologies are insufficient for anyone who threatens what is mine. Marco nodded, a flicker of a smile on his lips. The boss had always been ruthless, but this was different. This was personal. And the traitor's family? Marco asked. Leave them be, Dante said. Their punishment is knowing that their patriarch was brought down not by an army, but by the one woman he was foolish enough to dismiss. He finally turned from the window and walked toward Isla. She heard his footsteps and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. He reached her and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent. She was home. I have a gift for you, he murmured into her ear. He placed a small, velvet box in her hand. She opened it, her clever fingers identifying the contents immediately. It was a key, but not a normal key. It was heavy, ornate. What is this for? She asked. It is the master key to this building, he replied. To my cars. To the safe in my office. To everything that is mine. Because it is all yours now, Mia Regina. She clutched the key, the weight of it a solid, tangible symbol of her new reality. She had stumbled blindly into the most dangerous man in the city, and in his darkness, she had found a world that finally, truly saw her. She was not the clumsy blind girl anymore. She was the queen of this violent, beautiful kingdom, and her king would let the world burn before he ever let her out of his sight again. Thank you for joining us for this intense story. If you felt that powerful connection and loved seeing our heroine rise to her rightful place, please show your support. Hit the like button, share the story with someone else who loves a tale of fierce devotion, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new dark romance. Comment below and tell us what you think Dante should do to Rico Vela. We read every single comment. We have more stories of underestimated women and the powerful men who fall for them coming soon. Until next time, stay safe in the shadows.